Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? We are ready for a webinar, I hope. This is Jeremiah, and we are going to be talking about blocks. Blocks are pretty darn cool. When it comes down to it in CAD, you can pretty much get away with only three objects a polyline, a hatch, and a block. Pretty much everything you do. If you just had those three things, that was all that CAD had, you'd be fine. But blocks in and of themselves kind of become a fractal because what's a block? Well, it's a bunch of other object types. But blocks just represent everything. Anytime you want to click on an object and have it be a thing, really they should be called things and not blocks, but it is what it is. But that's what this webinar is going to be. Definitely aiming at a lower experience level with CAD. But it's always nice to brush up on the basics, right? But also to see how we deal with blocks through the land effects library. So just to become a real expert in land effects, this is still applicable to really anyone of any skill level. But certainly slightly more towards a CAD beginner. But anyway, judge for yourself. I still want to scare people away and on either extreme, I guess. It's going to be a great webinar. It's going to cover some really fantastic concepts. It is being recorded, so this will be up on the website later today. But while you're watching this live, why, what is this down at the bottom of the screen? That little Q&A button. That stands for questions and answers. I would recommend you go ahead and click it right now because you'll see the little Q&A box. Be very easy for you to type in a question. One pops in your brain. But also note you're going to see the answers that we type to other people's questions. So it makes a great companion while you are on this little journey with us. So that being said, let's start that journey. Hey, James, I think it is time to take it away.
Thanks, Jer. Good morning. Happy Friday, everyone. Here's me. I'm James. I wear a few different hats here at Land Effects. As you can see, content creation, manufacturer relations, and video production are three of my primary roles. And this webinar is right up my alley. So I'm excited to, spend a little time today playing with blocks. I think my toddler self would be pretty proud of that. Um, so before we get into the weeds on things, let's take a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. Like Jer said, blocks are truly prolific throughout CAD. And one thing I want to mention before we get into this, we have some really, really great in-depth resources available for all things blocks. Whether you want to learn more about block management or block creation, dynamic blocks, you name it. We have long form, short form videos available and written documentation. So if we don't get to your specific question today, we can definitely point you in the direction to find the answers to your specific question. So first, we want to talk about what is a block. We'll go over that. We'll talk about different types of blocks. The word block is a bit of an umbrella term in a way. There's a lot of things that aren't explicitly called blocks that are actually blocks. Some good examples would be irrigation equipment symbols, lighting symbols, schedules. There's all kinds of different things that are not named blocks, but they are blocks. And one big takeaway from today is we want to wrap our head around how Land Effects manages blocks. Understanding how this relationship with the block libraries works is important not only to increase your efficiency, but it will also allow you to integrate and create your own custom blocks and manage them in a much more efficient way. We will touch on block creation and best practices. This is something that we have entire videos on. So while we will create some blocks today and we will talk about some best practices, this is going to be pretty top level. We're going to take a look at what's basically a checklist or some like really critical points that you want to check when you're creating blocks. And the steps that we use internally when we're auditing or creating our own blocks to make sure that they are built to the best performance and efficiency. And then once we've wrapped our head around that, we'll take a look at saving different types of blocks and how to do that and how you can integrate your own blocks into these block libraries so that all of the functionality and benefits from using the Land Effects block libraries can apply to your own blocks. And there's so much room for customization there that we'll give you the bullet points and show you how to do things so that you can make up your own mind on how you wish to integrate your blocks. So what is a block? Jer kind of hinted at this. A block is just a collection of objects combined into a single entity. If you were going to take a bench block, for example, and it was on your plan and you click on it, it seems like it's one object. If you checked your properties panel, it would just say one block. But if you were to actually look at what that block is made of, it's made of a bunch of objects. A bench would likely be made of a series of polylines, probably some hatches. So um, a block is a collection of objects. It's not necessarily a single item. Um, and a block is just a DWG. At the end of the day, it's not magic. It's not some secretive kind of file type or anything like that. It's just a drawing that contains only the contents that you want for that block. Um, if you are one of the poor souls who has a workflow where all of your blocks are saved in a single drawing, like a master file, if you will, and you're copying and placing out of your blocks, um, I can't urge you enough to move away from that. In fact, my first job right out of school that was included working with CAD. That's how we worked. And looking back on that, I can't even imagine how much time we wasted trying to maintain that type of a situation. Um, and much in the same vein, if you have a template that you load that has a bunch of blocks saved in it, and you're going to sort through those, we want to urge you to move away from that because it's just going to add up over time with so much sunk time into your process of just maintaining and using your blocks. So that's what a block is essentially. And we want to show you how to manage all of those blocks today and increase your workflow efficiency and just save you time. There's a number of different types of blocks. The most basic form of block is just kind of a standard block. You can think of it like as is. So if, again, using the bench example, if you just have a standard bench block and you place that in your plan, then you place it and it's there. Now, you can, of course, use all of your normal drafting tools to manipulate it manually, rotate it, move it, scale it, all of that. But in terms of the functionality that's built into the block, it's just standard. It is what it is. We also have dynamic blocks. These are much like standard blocks, but they have additional functionality. So if you were to place a dynamic block and then select it, you would see what AutoCAD calls grips. They're these little buttons essentially that you can interact with to further manipulate the block. Some really cool examples would be a stretch parameter or a flip parameter, which would allow you to place the block. And then by clicking on the grip, it would automatically elongate or flip its direction or its orientation. Another great example of a dynamic block would be the use of visibility states. What this means is you place a block and then you click on the little grip and you have a list of different visibility states you can choose from. So this is commonly used in things like boulders, where you have like a medium-sized boulder, for example, and that dynamic boulder would have multiple visibility states. So you could change the look and they would be all similarly sized boulders. Um, so we'll play with some dynamic blocks a little bit later. Just note that if you're interested in dynamic block creation, we're not really going to dive into that today, but we have a whole series of videos on specifically dynamic blocks. Another type of block would be a dim scale block. These adjust to your viewport scale. So what we're going to talk about today in relation to this is the relationship between model space and paper space and the use cases for dim scale blocks. We're going to definitely dive into that more, but just for the sake of this intro, I just want to mention it. And some examples of blocks. Like we said, there's so many various kinds of blocks. We have plant symbols, irrigation equipment, schedules, concept lines, site blocks. There are blocks through and through with CAD. There's so many, almost endless options. And for a big takeaway today, we want to understand how LandFX manages blocks. We're going to kind of peek under the hood, if you will, a little bit, kind of see what is going on a little bit on the back end. We're going to look at the block folder structure. And as we understand that and how it relates to what you're seeing in the software is gonna give you a full understanding of how these blocks are organized, saved, and so on. And again, as we're going through today, I think it's going to be self-evident why you want to move away from templates or master drawings with lots of blocks in them. And we're going to take a look at some other cool features of how Land Effects blocks are downloaded on the fly. So for block creation and best practices, this slide might be worth taking a screenshot when the slide is full, because this is going to serve as a good checklist for what to look for when you're creating or auditing blocks. This one might seem simple, but trust me, if you're in a hurry or you're not paying attention, it's easy to overlook. You want to make sure that before you do any block creation, that you always set your units before you begin drafting. You want to load the appropriate layer states. Like we said before, a block is a collection of objects, and all of those objects need to be on their appropriate layer. Otherwise, it can create some issues down the line. You want to make sure you assign the correct preference set. You want to draw all elements at full size. And the reason we say at full size and not truly at 1-to-1 is because there's different blocks with different context. For example, if you're drawing a bench and it's intended to be used on a plan, you'll draw that bench at its actual size. So if you have a 6-foot bench, you'll draw that at 6 feet. So that's 1-to-1. However, when we're working with dim scale blocks, these are blocks that are intended to be used on paper space. You want to draw them at their actual size on the paper. This will be really obvious when we get to this in the demonstration, but draw all elements of your block at full size in the correct context. You also want to strike a balance between detail and legibility. And this is something that I personally struggled with in the beginning because I come from an engineering background, so I wanted to draw everything with like perfect detail. And honestly, that's not a good idea. A quick example might be if you're drawing a plan view of a vehicle. Let's say you meticulously draw the vehicle and you get every little nut and bolt and the tire tread and everything is just beautiful. And yeah, it might look great when you're up close, zoomed in on that block. But what happens when you have to, design an entire parking lot or an entire street and you have to populate them with these cars? Now, when you zoom out, uh, you will see that all of those cars with all that fine detail, they just start to bleed together. So they just start to look more and more like a black blob. That's because there's limits to how fine a line can be represented. And this issue just gets even more obvious when you start trying to print things. It's good to note that when you're doing your blocks, your line work should only consist of polylines, arcs, and circles. You want to avoid splines for a number of reasons, but some big ones are if you have splines, they'll bloat the file size of your block and then decrease its performance. But also, splines can create issues in other anomalous ways when you're using the software. So just avoid splines. You want to use circles and arcs for that. And it's worth noting that text and lines are okay to use in blocks. For lines, just why would you use a line when you can use a polyline, I guess? There's just so many more advantages. And then another critical thing you want to make sure you do is set the insertion point for your block correctly. If you're creating a block in its own drawing from scratch, you'll want to orient it in relation to the XY coordinates of 0, 0, because that's what it will be used as your insertion point. So those are some really good block creation best practices. And a final note on this that is so critical and easy to miss is make sure that the drawing that your block is in is free of proxies, XREFs, and other junk. The only thing that should be in a block drawing, a DWG, is the content that you want the block to have. So if you have a drawing that has proxies in it and you're just using that block willy-nilly, you're just going to be spreading proxies, and it's just a nightmare. So make sure that all of your blocks are in clean drawing files. So if you want to go ahead and screenshot this, I use a list a lot like this when I'm doing all my block auditing and stuff. That final note with the proxies, XREFs, and textiles is probably more important when you're taking a block or a drawing from somebody else and creating a block. If you're starting with a fresh drawing, you're less likely to have any of these issues, but you just still need to be aware of them. Then we're going to take a look at saving and integrating your own blocks. The key takeaway here, and this applies to block creation as well, but whenever you're in the mindset of creating or integrating a block, what you really want to understand is the intended use case of the block, because that's going to answer so many questions for you, and it's going to help you design the block in the correct manner. So when you're creating a block, you want to consider, is this going to be a model space block? Is this something that I want to have a set scale, or is this something that I want to manually scale? Is this something that's going to live on paper space? Is this something that's going to have to adjust with my viewport scale and so on? So if you can wrap your head around the intended use of your block, it's going to set you up for success when you're creating that block or when you're integrating it into the system. We'll take a look at the various Land Effects save block tools. These are super nice. When it comes to block library management, these are amazing because they save your blocks directly into the correct location, and it takes a lot of the management calculus out of your hands. It's just done for you automatically. So we're going to look at plan graphics a lot today. We'll look at some elevation graphics potentially. We'll look at discipline graphics, detail builder blocks, and we'll even cover shooting slides. If we don't get into a specific use case for you, note that these principles we're showing today will apply to most situations. So if we don't have time to play with elevation graphics, note that all of the steps to saving your blocks and integrating them and the block creation are going to apply to both plan and elevation graphics. Now, real quick, before we just hop into things, do we have any initial questions that we want to take care of?
No, you're good. Go for it.
Right on, let's hop in. Okay, so hopefully you all can see my screen. This is a FX CAD here, and I have a mock plan that we'll be playing around in today. This is nothing fancy. It's very bare bones. It's just here to give a little bit of context to what we're going to be talking about today. It's a little bit more fun than looking at just a blank screen. Before we dive into CAD, though, what I wanted to do is take a peek behind the curtain or look under the hood and take a look at some folder structures on where blocks are generally saved. Here you can see that I have my file browser open, and I'm looking at my local disk, and here I have my land effects folder. So when we're working with blocks, the first thing you want to do is locate your land effects folder. And within your land effects folder, you'll have a blocks folder. So if we open that, here we can see kind of our top level of our block libraries, if you will. So we have detail, discipline, elevation, plan graphics, and site amenities here. Those are all individual block libraries. So if we went into plan graphics, for example, now we'd have our categories of plan graphics. You might be looking at this and initially wondering why there's number prefixes on these files. That's for a few reasons, but first and foremost is these folders will sort alphanumerically. So if we didn't put numerical prefixes, they would just sort alphabetically. So our solution to being able to control the order in which these are sorted is by adding the prefix. And you will see here that we skip numbers 5, 10, 15, 25, and so on. This is so that there's plenty of room for you to incorporate your own folders how you see fit. You can create folders here, and we'll do that later. But you can create folders here, and at any time, if you want to incorporate your own blocks, you can save them at this level. Additionally, if we drill down into one of these site furnishings, now we have all of our categories of plan graphic site furnishings. And you can also add your own folders here in this list. And then you can go down to the block level and we can actually look at our benches. Now, when we get down to this level, you'll see there's a couple of interesting things. I have a few different file types in here. So if I just go ahead and I sort these by kind, you'll see that I have all of my DWGs. So each one of these DWGs represents a single block. beyond the DWG, I have a bunch of these slide files. Now, slide files are really useful because they're very small in file size. What they allow you to do, or allow the system to do rather, is when you're browsing through the block libraries in the CAD side, it only has to pull a slide. It only has to pull a very small file, and then that allows you to preview a block without having it downloaded physically. So if I sort these again by name, you'll see a lot of these I have a DWG and a slide file for. But if I scroll down further, you'll see that I have a number of slides down here that don't have DWGs. And so when we hop into CAD, I'll kind of explain how that's corresponding on the CAD side. So this is like a good little overview of how the folder structure works on your block libraries. You have the top level category. So you pick which library you want to look at. Then you have your major categories for that type of block. And then within those, you have the specific block folders. And at any point, you can integrate your own folders and your own blocks and mix them in. You can even go as far as to put your blocks in the same folders as ours if you just want to use our organizational structure. You'll note that all of our blocks start with an LAFX prefix, and then they adhere to a strict naming convention. So that'll allow you to name your blocks however you'd like and integrate them accordingly. So that's a quick sneak peek at the folder structure. Let's go ahead and hop into CAD and take a look at how that looks in the CAD side. So here we are. I'm on my FX Site tab. This is a good place to start. If I see my block tool here, I can click this drop-down menu, and now I have these different categories. So these are directly corresponding to those folders that we were looking at. So plan graphics, elevation graphics, discipline, and so on. If I were to click on plan graphics, now I'm presented with my dialog box here. This browsing tree on the side directly parallels that folder structure we were looking at. So if I were to open Site Furnishings and click on Benches, here you'll see I have benches that I can browse through. These are all the Land Effects default benches. So what I'm seeing here is the slide file. So as I browse through this, and it loads these for the first time, it's going to download all of those slide files on the fly for me so I can preview the blocks. But at this point, I still haven't downloaded any blocks. So they're not taking up space on my computer, which is really nice. It's not until you actually place the land effects block that it downloads it on the fly for you. It's a nice feature that is very useful. Saves you a lot of space and time not having to download a huge file to install your blocks. So if we wanted to place a block, we could come here to our umbrellas, for example, and we can browse through these umbrellas. If I wanted to start with this one, all I have to do is select it and then click OK. Now, you can see here I have the umbrella floating wherever my cursor goes. I haven't actually placed the umbrella yet. So I haven't clicked, I haven't done anything. I'm just moving my mouse around and I have this floating umbrella. If I use my mouse wheel, I can pan and explore around my plan without having to exit out of the command. If I wanted to place an umbrella, all I have to do is click and place it. But before I place it, I want to show a cool feature. If I press K, this will open up my keyboard commands. And this allows me to have more functionality within the block placing tool. You can see that I have different things available to me. I can toggle my views, I can toggle through categories, and I can do even cool things like copy along a polyline. So let's show off some of these. If I click OK, it closes my keyboard commands. And if I were to use my A and D keys, I could switch my view of my umbrella. So in this case, we can see this umbrella has a corresponding elevation view. So if I wanted to do an elevation of this area and show this umbrella, I already have it done. Additionally, I could switch through categories and switch to benches and stuff, but since we're trying to place an umbrella, let's go ahead and place one. So with a single click, I can place, and then I have a manual rotation on this block. So I get to set the rotation prior to placing it. With a symmetrical block like an umbrella, it's not as big of a deal, but with something that's more directional, like a bench or a light or something, this feature is extra helpful. So all I have to do is click one more time, and now that block is placed in my plan. And you'll see I still have the place block command active. Now, if I were to use the P key, I could copy this block along a polyline. So if I hit P and I look down here in my command line, it's going to tell me to select the polyline in which I want to copy this highlighted block along. So if I select this polyline, now all I'm doing is moving my mouse. I'm not having to click anything. It's actually fitting umbrellas and following this line. And I can use my A and D keys to adjust my spacing. So I can increase or decrease my spacing until I see fit. And all I have to do is one more click. And now I've placed 4 umbrellas with just a few clicks. It's really an awesome tool. So I'll exit out of that. And now you can see that each one of these blocks is what we were referring to as a standard block in our slideshow. Once it's placed, it's there. I can use my move commands, sure, and I can move them around, or I could manually rotate them. But as far as the block functionality goes, that's it. It's done. It's placed. So let's take a look at another example of a dynamic block. If I come up to my plan graphics again, I can come down here to amenities and I could show off something like a boulder. When you're browsing through these blocks, it doesn't matter which category you're in. If you see this blue icon or you see a D at the end of a land effects block, that's indicating to you that that's a dynamic block. So let's go ahead and grab this dynamic boulder and let's place one on our plan. And again, I have rotation like I did with my umbrella. But now if I select this block, you can see I have this additional grip. This is what we were talking about in our slideshow. And if I click on that grip, I can see here I have 13 different visibility states to choose from. So I can toggle through some of these and just play with it. And you can see that I can change the appearance of this block by switching its visibility state. But the whole time, it's the same block definition in my drawing. So it's the same block. If I were to do something like copy along a polyline again with this block, I could go ahead and select my tool. And then if I look at my command line, it's asking me to choose my source object. So we'll go ahead and select that block. And then I'll click on the line I want to copy along. And just like the umbrella, it's going to copy them automatically for me. But what's really cool is the system recognizes that this block has various visibility states and it will automatically randomize the visibility state so that when I create this like rock pathway here, I can see that it looks a lot less cookie cutter. It looks a lot more randomized and natural. And the coolest part is that each one of those is that same block. You can see here with the name, none of these are different. So that's just a cool example that shows off the power of dynamic blocks and what you can do with them. But at the end of the day, most of the tools still apply to both. So you still have all those keyboard commands to switch through your blocks. And then the dynamic blocks just offer an additional layer of functionality for you. So we've placed a couple of blocks. What about saving and creating blocks? So here's another conversation that is interesting. If I click on this bench here, you can see I have my bench name here, and it's just a single object. I just have one block reference. Now, if I were to, oops, I'm going to go ahead and turn my color off here so these colors don't get in our way. If I were to go ahead and explode this block, which I did right here, now I can see all of its individual components. So if I were to select all of these, you would see that I have 157 items. So this drives home the point in the beginning that this single block entity here is really a collection of 157 items. So let's go ahead and use this exploded block as an example of how to save or create a block. At this point in the discussion, there's kind of a fork in the road. There's going to be 2 different scenarios that are very common. The first scenario is going to be you've created a drawing and you're starting your block creation from scratch. The other scenario would be you working from a block or a drawing that has multiple things in it like this, where I don't have just this bench, but I have other objects. It's in context. It has some sort of additional information in the drawing. So if you are a person that has a master template file with all of your blocks in it, this will apply to you too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through how to save this block, and I'm going to touch on some of the block creation tips. as well as kind of paint the picture for both of these scenarios I just described. So um, what we want to do first is consider the intended use of this block. So this is going to be a site block. It's going to be drawn at full scale, 1-to-1 in this case, and it's intended to be used in model space. And beyond that, it's a site furnishing. So we know it's going to be a plan graphic. We know we want to put it in our furnishings, and we probably want to put it in with our benches. So now that we've qualified all those, we kind of have a good direction on how to approach this. So if I select all of these 157 items, I can confirm again that I have them all. I can come up to this drop-down menu where my blocks button is, and at the bottom I have this save block tool. So I'll go ahead and I'll select that. And if I refer to my command line down here, it's telling me that I need to specify my insertion point. So when we're talking about that fork in the road, if you are in my case where you're creating a block out of some drawing that has other things in it, I will have to click to specify where my insertion point is. If you were creating your block from scratch in a blank drawing, you'd want to locate the coordinate 0, 0 and orient your block accordingly so that 0, 0 represents the insertion point. For this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a poor insertion point to highlight the importance of this. For typical benches, it would be a decent idea to select a corner of the bench as an insertion point so that when you place a bench, it's intuitive to place and align on your plan. So typically I would choose something like this point. However, I'm going to just click over here off in space, and I'm going to intentionally choose a bad insertion point. So after you specify your insertion point, it's going to ask you where you want to save it. And it already knows to look at the blocks folder here. So now we're back working with this folder structure that we toured earlier. So I want to specify plan graphics, and I want to put it in site furnishing, and I want to put it in the standard benches folder. And then for this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this one the name Z test, just so I know that it's going to be at the very bottom of my list. So now I can go ahead and say save, and that'll tell the system where to save the block. And next we have this dialog box. And what you see here is a slide file. So upon saving the block, the system just shot the best slide file it could automatically. And you can tell it saw this bush and it saw this line, and it's still oriented wrong. So it's really a sloppy slide, and we're going to show you how to create nice slides here in a moment. But it shot a slide for us, and now we get to set the scale and the rotation settings. And this is important again with knowing your intended use case. So for this case, we want to leave our scale at 1-to-1 because we don't want to adjust the size of this bench. We just want it to be at its actual size. But we do want to set a manual rotation so that we have the option to spin it like we did with the boulder and the umbrella. So you want to pay attention to these before you just breeze through this dialog box. This is really important for how your block will function. So when you're ready, you can just go ahead and say okay, and we're done. It saved that block in our location. So if I were to come up here and go to my block, I would go to site furnishings and benches, and I know this one's going to be way at the bottom. So here I have my less than ideal slide, but there's my block. We can go ahead and place it now. So now I have a block, and it's coming in at this awkward orientation. And if you look at where my cursor is, that's where we specified the origin point or the insertion point. So you can see how important this is for efficiency's sake when you're trying to place blocks. If I wanted to place one over here and then rotate it into place, it's going to rotate about that insertion point as well. So it's really inefficient. So for now, we'll just place it right there. So now you're in this situation where, oh, I have a block, but it's not ideal. I need to improve it. Luckily for you, that's nice and easy. So what we'll do is we'll browse to that block again through our block browser, and we'll come down here to the bottom where it lives. And instead of clicking OK to place it this time, we'll go ahead and we'll click Edit. And again, here we can adjust our rotation and scale settings. But if I open File, what this is going to do is it's going to open a new drawing and it's opening the actual source file where it lives in the block library. So if I do a zoom extends here, you can see here's our block, here's our origin 0, 0, and this is now where the two paths converge. So if you were creating your block from scratch in an original drawing and you had some issues, it could look like this. And if you've saved your block out of another drawing and you misclicked and set up your insertion point wrong or something, you could also be in this scenario. So there's a few things that we want to do immediately. First, we want to fix that insertion point, and we want to fix the orientation of our block, because if we look at all of these other benches, they're all oriented horizontally. So the first thing we want to do is fix this weird angle that it's at and correct the origin insertion point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my color layer, because when the system shoots a slide, it turns the color off. And I want to go ahead and select everything. And I want to move this corner to my insertion point of 0, 0. So now with the move command, I just selected everything, typed M for move, and then I selected the first corner. And instead of clicking anywhere, I just typed 0, 0, and that told the system to move all of this content to 0, 0 at this point. So the same way we moved it, now we can go ahead and we can rotate it. So I can go ahead and type RO, and if I click here, oops, I misclicked, I'm sorry. So I'll select everything, type RO and hit enter. We'll select, oh man, my snap, that's frustrating. I'll go ahead and grab the actual corner. Oh man, I'm batting 1,000 right now. Let's get it right. Why is it doing that?
Just type 0, 0, 0,
Okay.
0.
I've never run into that before. So anyways, now I can freely rotate my block here, and we'll just kind of eyeball it to make sure it's relatively good. So, something like that looks good. Okay. So now our block is oriented correctly, and we have it rotated the way we want it. So the final thing that we need to fix in this case is our slide. So we'll show you how to shoot a nice fresh slide. First, what I'm going to do is turn that color back off. And the important thing to understand when you're shooting a slide is the system is going to preview these slides in this space. This space is, I think, a 4:3 aspect ratio. So it's not quite square. It's a little bit wider than it is high. So what we want to do is we want to orient our window here, our actual working space, to be as close as we can to that aspect ratio. You can get super high tech if you want and actually hold up a ruler to your screen. But for our purposes today, we're just going to kind of eyeball it. So I'm going to stretch my properties window over to where it's approximately that same aspect ratio here with our working area. And I'll do a zoom extends just to get the block nice and tidy. And at this point, we should be able to shoot a slide. So in order to do that, all you have to do is type mslide into the command line and press enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to say, hey, we noticed that this DWG lives here. Is this where you want to save the slide? So it's already found the right location for us, and we want to say yes. The reason that this slide already exists is because when we first initially saved the block, the system did its best to shoot a slide, but it wasn't set up for success. So we'll go ahead and we'll say yes, and then we will say yes, we want to replace it. And just like that, we now have a slide. So we've edited the actual source file for this block to correct it, and now we've shot a clean slide. We can hop back over to our drawing and take a look at it. So I'll close this and I'll just say, yeah, we'll save it. Now we're back on our actual plan. So let's get this properties window a little bit out of the way, and let's go ahead and browse to our block. And what you're going to see here is down here, we have a much cleaner slide and our block is there. But what's going to happen is when we place it, you'll notice it's still not correct. And before you freak out, we did this on purpose to illustrate how block definitions kind of function. So when you place a block in a drawing, it is defined within that drawing. So you can see that I have these 4 tables. If I click on one, I can see the block name and its information. But as far as the system is concerned, these are all the same single block definition. So it only has to remember one block definition and then the location for every instance. So what happened was when we initially created this block incorrectly, it was defined in this drawing, which means even though we went and we fixed it, the system is going to first check our drawing and it's going to say, hey, this was already defined. I don't have to go look for it. And so it's going to pull it. So the way you want to adjust that is you want to make sure that all of your instances of your block are deleted from your drawing. And then you're going to want to run the purge command. And the purge command does a number of things, but one thing it's going to do in our case is it's going to get rid of any unused block definitions. So we've deleted all instances of the incorrect block, and now we've purged the drawing so that the block definition is no longer in the drawing. And now if we come back and we place our block, you'll see that it's now the system's gonna see that the block definition is not in the drawing, and it's gonna go look for the source block, and it's gonna pull the correct one. So now we have a block here that has all of the changes that we made to it. And so now we can rotate it and adjust it however we see fit. So to kind of sum all of that up, when you're creating a block, you want to understand the intended use case. You want to set the block up correctly so that it's the only thing in its DWG. There's nothing else in that drawing. And then you want to make sure that you shoot a proper slide for it so that while you're previewing all of your blocks through the browser, that you'll have the ability to see them. Before we kind of move into the next section, do we have any questions?
We've had a few questions, but not super relevant to what you've been showing. So I think we're good for now.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I realized I mistakenly deleted a folder of blocks that I wanted to use. So I'm going to restore that really quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to show you, where did those go? Huh. Okay, well, I'm going to create a folder of blocks. So let's say I take some of these guys. And I create a new folder. So what this new folder is, what this new folder is going to do is be representative of blocks that you might have already had. So let's say you have a folder of blocks, and in there you have your blocks. I'm going to go ahead and just remove these names while I speak, but if you're going through and you're managing your own blocks and you have them all prepped according to our drawing standards, and if you had them all in one location and you've taken the time to carefully split them all out, and now you have your own folders and you want to integrate your own folders, this is how you will do so. So here's our mock-up of blocks here. We have a folder here with a few blocks in it, and it's living in this location. Yours might be anywhere. You're going to want to navigate to your land effects folder, and then within there, open your blocks folder. And so what we're going to do next is consider the intended use of these blocks. And we need to know where to integrate them. So in this case, I grabbed plan graphic benches. So we would want to integrate into plan graphics. And let's say we want to integrate them a little further down. We want to include them in site furnishings, but we don't want to go as far as including them in the land effects benches. I can then just put my folder here in the location that I want it to show up at in the file browser, and I can give it whatever name I'd like. So let's say I wanted to call this Office Standard Benches so that they're differentiated very easily from the land effects benches. So you can go in here and you can see that I have DWGs, but I have no slides. So we've put our DWGs in the correct location where we want them to live, but we don't have them fully set up yet. So if I hop back into CAD, I'll show you what that looks like. So if I come over here to Plan Graphics and I come to my site furnishings, you'll see that I have benches, chairs, hammocks, and there it is, Office Standard Benches. Now, the interesting thing here is because these don't have slide files, the system just kept the hammocks there because that was the last one I clicked on. It could be any category, it could be tables, you see. So what you're going to want to do is shoot slides for your drawings. It's important so that you can see them. Otherwise, you're going to be relegated to only the name, and you're going to have to know every block's specific name. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, oh man, I don't want to go through and shoot a slide for every single block. And luckily for you, you don't have to. What we're going to want to do is use a tool called Batchman. And Batchman is going to be able to shoot slides in mass. So we'll be able to do a whole folder or even a whole collection of folders at one time. So in order to do that, let's close our Block Explorer dialog box here. And before you run Batchman, you want to make sure that you only have one drawing open. And because we are going to be shooting slides, we want to adjust our screen to be that approximate aspect ratio here. So once we have that all kind of dialed in and we're in slide shooting mode, if you will, we can come up here to our admin tab and we can navigate to this tool over here called Batchman. Now, if you hover over any tool, it'll give you a description of the tool, a brief description. But if you ever need more information about a specific tool, you can see at the bottom there, you can press F1 for more help. I mentioned that with Batchman because Batchman is one of the coolest tools. It's extremely powerful and useful. And I don't say that to intimidate you. It's not complicated, but it does a lot. So if you ever want to play around or learn more about Batchman, you can click more info or you can click the F1 button previously. But for today, what we're going to do is we're only going to use Batchman to shoot slides. So now that we have our Batchman dialog box window open and we have our CAD window set up and prepared for slide shooting, we can go ahead and run it. So you can add individual files, you can add a folder, or you can add a folder with subfolders within. In our case, we inserted one folder of blocks. So we'll go ahead and we'll add that folder and we're going to browse to it. So it's in our Land Effects folder under blocks and we put it under plan graphics, site furnishings, and office standard benches right there. If you had folders within folders, you just want to make sure you select the correct option so that Batchman knows to drill down into those folders. So once we click OK, it's going to go ahead and load our benches here, and you can see that it found them all. So that's a good sign. And then next thing what we want to do is check this box right here that says make a slide, and we are off to the races. We can go ahead and click OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to open up each individual DWG. It's going to zoom extends, and that's why it's important that we have our screen adjusted prior to running this so that our slides look reasonable. And then it's going to go ahead and it's going to shoot a slide with no color for each file in that folder. So it's just going to run through the whole folder one by one. And you know, it's pretty fast, but if you had hundreds of blocks, this might take a moment. So you'd want to, you know, do this in a mindful way. You'd want to set it up so that it could run for a few minutes and shoot all of your slides. You don't want to have to try to do something else while Batchman's running your slide shooting. But anyways, now it's done. It ran through those. Let's come back over to our site tab and look at our blocks folder again and check out our new slides. So if I go ahead and I click plan graphics and then I go to site furnishings and I come down here, you can see now for those benches, they all have an appropriate slide. And you can see that these are a little bit in from the edge compared to the Land Effects ones that fill the whole screen. So you might need to do a little trial and error and a little testing to get this workspace dialed in to your liking. But the beauty of Batchman is that once you have it set and you've shot a test slide and you like the way it looks, then you can run it with confidence knowing that all of your consequent slides are going to look good. Before we kind of jump onto some other specialty types of blocks, is there any other questions about slide shooting or Batchman or anything like that?
You know, it was a really good question that came up. Someone had mentioned they were saving a bunch of blocks and apparently had the units marked incorrectly, and so they all got marked as imperial units when they were saving them in metric. And I thought it was just a good point to mention that if you go ahead and click on one of those benches and click on edit, that data there, the scaling and the units, that is just saved in that XML. So you can also use a software that can do a search and replace in text files, which is all that XML is. And we've certainly had to use that to correct either the scale, the rotation setting for some of our blocks. So there's a number of different softwares out there. The one I've always used is Ultra Edit, but there is other software that will let you search and replace in text files, multiple files at once, and so you can use that to make bulk changes if necessary. So just pointing that out.
That's a very good point. I've definitely made that mistake myself before. When Jer mentioned the XML file, if you're unfamiliar, if you go to your block library location for any given block, you'll see the DWG itself, the drawing file. You'll see the slide that we showed you how to create, and then you'll see a corresponding XML file. That's what Jer was referencing to, and that's how you can find them. Okay, so we've kind of covered some basic stuff when it comes to managing and creating blocks and shooting slides. Let's look at some less common but equally important types of blocks. I'm going to open up our little mock plan here again. And I also want to open up this detail drawing. So really quick, we'll start with the dim scale block because this one's important to wrap your head around. And if we run out of time, I don't want to miss this. So dim scale blocks. In the beginning, I spoke about the relationship between model space and paper space. So if you think of model space as the real world, everything's drawn at actual size. So, you know, this umbrella here is probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 feet across. 6 feet. So that's an actual 6-foot umbrella drawn at 6 feet. And you can see it in relation to these people and these bushes, and everything is full size. If I hop over to paper space, even a large format piece of paper like this one that represents 24 inches by 36 inch and is on like a large scale printer, there's no way you're fitting any useful amount of visual information on the paper if it's all at 1-to-1. So if you think about model space as the real world and you think about paper space as, you know, literally a paper on your desk, the way we deal with that is we have a viewport. So this green box here is called a viewport. The best way to think about a viewport is to kind of think about it as a window. So if you're in a room and you have a window opposite you and you're not moving, you have a finite amount of the world that you can see. You can only see as much as you can see through the window. As you approach the window and you zoom in, you're effectively increasing your field of view. You're going to see more and more of the real world. So if we click in here into my viewport, I double clicked. Now I'm active in my viewport. This will allow me to zoom in and out and set my scale and stuff. It's worth noting that this little icon in the bottom right will lock your viewport, which means if I'm in my viewport like I am now, but I have it locked, I can zoom in and out and I'm not going to accidentally zoom into model space. Let me show you another thing about viewports. If I click out and I'm now on my paper space, I can't actually interact with anything within the viewport because it's in model space. Now, if I click into my viewport, I'm essentially reaching through the window. Now I can click and interact with things. So you got to be really mindful when you're working in paper space to be aware of whether or not you're actively in the viewport or whether you're on your paper space. So what I have here, and I can zoom in freely because I have my viewport locked. If I unlock that, it'll zoom in and out. If I look here, this is kind of a mock-up of like a lighting fixture. So if this was light shining to light up the statue here. The problem is if I were to draw this block at 1-to-1 like it is, like a relatively reasonable size in model space, what happens is on my paper space, as I zoom out, that block is just going to get smaller and smaller and less legible. So if I check out my viewport scale here, you can see that I'm set to 1 inch equals 20 feet. What that means is 1 inch on my paper is representative of 20 feet in model space. So to kind of show you the difference, if I switch this to 1 inch equals 40 feet, and I say, yes, I want to activate my viewport scale, you can see now it shrunk by that amount because now 1 inch is equal to 40 feet. So what we'll do is we'll just go back and we'll just leave it at 1-to-20 for now because it's a pretty common viewport scale. So what we want to do is we want to be able to create our dim scale block on this paper. We want it to show up the size that we want it to read on the paper. And that's so if you're giving your drawing, whether it's a physical drawing printed out or a PDF, and you're sharing it with a client or a contractor, they're going to need to be able to identify things like lighting symbols and irrigation equipment and things that are too small to be represented at one-to-one scale. And so what we want to do is we don't want to save our block like we did at the bench from model space. We want to actually do that from paper space. And since I haven't drawn anything on paper space here, but I do have that symbol in model space, what I'll do is I'll go into my viewport, and you can tell it's highlighted, so I know I'm in my viewport. And I can select the objects that I want to bring to paper space. So in this case, it's 4 objects. And what I want to do is do the command called change space. And the way you do that is you type ch space. And you can see now in our command line that the 4 objects were moved from model space to paper space. So if I now click out of my viewport and I know I'm in my paper space, again, I can't interact with anything that's in the viewport because that's in model space still. But now I have my little lighting symbol on my paper space. So now what we want to do is scale this appropriately to where it looks good. In this case, our drawing was set to 1:20, and that's a pretty common scale. So what we'll do is we'll kind of use our manual scale tool here. We'll type scale and hit enter, and we'll select our insertion point here, and we'll scale this up. We'll zoom out a bit, and we'll scale it up until it's legible. It seems realistic, you know. Keep in mind, this is a very large paper, so this is kind of an extreme case, but what we can do is scale it up to where it looks appropriate about there. And I'll move it so that it's in open space and it's easy for us to see. So now if I'm looking at this plan, you know, it's relatively a legible size. I'd be able to see all of the lights on this plan and easily identify them. So now that we have that taken care of, we have our object drawn in actual size at paper space, because that's the context in which we want to use it. We can go ahead and save it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these objects that I want to be in the block. And just like before, I'm going to use my Save Block tool from the FX Site ribbon. And now I need to specify my origin point or my insertion point. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this spot here because it seems like a good one. And then I'm going to tell the system where to save it. And in this case, this being a lighting symbol, we'll go ahead and we'll put it in discipline graphics. We'll put it under electrical and under lighting. And of course, you could put any block anywhere you want. We'll call this one test light, I suppose, just something simple. And we'll go ahead and save it. And again, you know, we didn't get a good slide, but that's okay. We know how to create good slides now. And this is where we want to pay attention. On this one, we want the scale. We don't want it to be manual or 1:1. We want to make sure we check dim scale because that's going to respect the viewport scale. And then for this one, we also, since it is directional, want to add a manual rotation. And we can go ahead and we can click OK. And just like before, that block is now going to be put into the location we want it. So if I just move this one out of the way for now, we can come up here to our blocks tool. We can navigate to our discipline graphics, and I can find my electrical, and I have my block here. Of course, I'd want to improve my slide, but now if I go ahead and I place it, it's coming in at the size we drew it on paper space, and I can click and I can rotate it. And I can blind this poor guy here. And now when I zoom out, let's go ahead and get rid of this one. Why are you not going? Okay. So now when I zoom out, I can see that he's pretty legible, especially on a large piece of paper. You know, this is actually 24 inches by 36. So if I go ahead and I open or click into my viewport again and I change my scale and we scale this down to 1 inch equals 40 feet, you'll see that everything changes, but my block stays the same size. My lighting block is still respecting the dim scale. So if I go ahead and I scale this to, I don't know, something more extreme, 1:10, you can see the plan will actually get bigger and my symbol is still the same size. So that's the importance of dim scale blocks, and why it's important to understand the intent of the block before you try to save it or create it. And then really quick, another cool type of block I want to show off because it doesn't get enough love is our detailed builder blocks. If you are working on a bunch of concrete details, like in this example, it's a concrete wall. Let's say you're having to do a bunch of concrete details. If you come over to our FX Details tab and you drop down this graphics menu, you see some of the familiar faces, but we also have this additional detail builder blocks. This block library is really cool because it's going to cover things that are typically not used on your landscapes site. So you're going to have more like hardware, nuts and bolts, anything you want to save in here, you can add. But since we're working with a concrete example, let's say that we want to use masonry concrete elements and we want to do a section elevation because we want to show a section view of a wall that we have to create. I can take like this block wall example, and all of my keyboard commands, like my other that apply to my other blocks, will apply here, and I can go ahead and I can place these guys and say I needed this to be 4 units high. Now I have my new wall represented with just a few clicks. So if you're ever working with details, please go check out the detail builder blocks. They can really increase your efficiency with creating details. You have all of that same functionality with your keyboard commands and so on that allow you to place blocks really rapidly and not have to worry about managing them on the back end. With that being said, we're pretty close on time. Is there any other questions or anything else we should touch on before we wrap?
I think, yeah, it's probably. I mean, do you have anything more, or should we, or is your agenda all gone?
I have one more thing we could talk about briefly, which is the AutoCAD classic insert command. So if you were going to insert a block using the default AutoCAD method, if I come back over here to model space, for example, and I'll turn these colors off just because they're in my way. Oh, no, it doesn't matter. Let's say I wanted to insert a block using the default AutoCAD command. I could type classic insert and get this dialog box. We recommend that you don't use this method, not because it's bad per se, it's just so much less efficient. One cool thing about it though is that can be useful for troubleshooting and such is if I click this drop down menu, I'm able to see all of the block definitions that are in my drawing. So if you had that issue before that we illustrated with the insertion point and you're like, hey, I updated this block, but it's not placing, and you wanted to look at your block definitions to see if it's still defined, if that block was still in this list, you'd want to make sure to run purge to clear it out like we showed. But anyways, you can select any block that's already defined in your drawing to place, and then you can go ahead and click OK to place it. Or you can go ahead and you can click browse and you can navigate to any folder on your computer to place it, which is all right. But then once you place the block, you're going to run into different kinds of issues with your scale and your units, and you can only place one block at a time and you don't have access to the keyboard commands. So there's nothing wrong with the classic insert method, but we just kind of steer people towards the land effects methods because they're exponentially more efficient.
Well said. Well said. And along those lines, it was nice showing off the detail blocks. That also letting people know. I would personally recommend don't so much worry about all the tiniest little pieces and parts because we have a top secret plan. Of course, now if I'm saying it, it's not so secret anymore. But we are in the process of redoing the detail builder blocks, and we are revamping this dialog box, and we will be adding basically every little piece and part known to man. That's the goal. So it's going to take a little bit, but look forward to that. But I would just say before you go and say, "Oh, I'll add every bolt that they don't have." Well, that would be tedious, and we're doing that right now. So just pointing that out, always making things better for you guys. Well, it has come to that time. You've wasted another perfectly good hour learning about the magic of land effects. You're going to have to go and enjoy your beautiful day and have a wonderful weekend and have lovely dreams about what you saw. And please feel free to shoot us any ideas for future webinars. It always helps. And beyond that, everyone, we'll catch you next time.